I'm going to try to wrap up the history of Breckenridge Village in about 22 minutes, okay? And we may go just a little bit longer. But it's a pleasure to be able to do that. I can honestly say that one of my distinct pleasures was getting to know virtually all the people that were involved with the start of Breckenridge Village and who they were and what their thoughts were and the things that they really brought to the energy of this campus and our mission. And Bill, it's nice that Bill wanted to kind of tape some of this, and we'll let it go at that. So we'll take bits and pieces of it. But before we go back 38 years to the start of Breckenridge Village, we really have to go back to 1922. So I'm going to step back there very quickly. And a little girl by the name of Dorothy Love, who was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, and his wife in Sydney, Ohio, was struck and killed by an automobile. And the church wanted to do something in honor and memory of Dorothy Love. And they started an orphanage and an old folks home. And the orphanage fell to the wayside, and the first retirement community in what was then Ohio Presbyterian Homes was managed by the Synod of Ohio, and that's known as Dorothy Love. That was the first community in now Ohio Living, Ohio Presbyterian Retirement Services. So our history kind of goes back to a gift, and out of that there are now retirement communities throughout the state. And we were one of the newest children that came into existence in 1979. But well before the existence of the start of the campus, a gentleman by the name of Reverend Ken Schaefer, and we are all familiar with the Schaefer House, that building is in honor and memory of Reverend Ken Schaefer. He had discussions with a lady by the name of Beatrice Breckenridge Waugh back in the early 60s about bequeathing a piece of property. And that property was 18 acres on Route 84. And it became known in 1966 at the death of Beatrice Breckenridge Waugh that she did indeed bequeath the property. And I think this is about the only photo that I know of in existence of her house. And I remember asking Reverend Ken Schaefer, I said, boy, it was really a beautiful house. It was one of the old mansions. And it sat just about where the Schaefer House is. And the 18 acres was behind it. It was one of the old summer home estates. And Reverend Schaefer said, it looked beautiful on the outside, but it was a little bit like it had osteoporosis. That the foundation and everything inside of it was pretty weak. And they decided that it would be not worth it to save the building, and they decided to raise the building. So it took from 1966 until 1979 before Schaefer-Schweitzer House opened. And then Carl Brew, who was a resident in one of the ranches, his wife Jenny just passed away just about 4 or 5 months ago. Carl was very active with the Fairmount Presbyterian Church and with a gentleman by the name of Stephen Mentor. Does anyone remember the name of Stephen Mentor? Stephen was the president and chair of the Cleveland Foundation, and after 19 years retired in about 2004. When he was very early in his career, and I remember asking Stephen about that, he graduated from Baldwin Wallace with a social work degree, and he worked for the city and the county as a social worker, and he was very active in Fairmount Presbyterian Church. This is well before he became president and CEO of the Cleveland Foundation. And he and Carl Brew did a study on older adult ministry, and they did a presentation to the Synod of Ohio at that point in time, talking about what they envisioned for how a retirement community should basically function, not only to serve the residents on the campus, but out in the greater community. And so that kind of became the formation. That full presentation was done in 1970, but Carl gave me the Synod minutes. Joanne, this is what the minutes used to be like back in the Synod. Boy, I'll tell you, quite the book. And And I archived the one reference of the donation, and this is from the minutes from April 1968 to December 1968. And it says, at the present time we are in the I'm sorry, let me find it. Mrs. Beatrice Waugh, who passed away several years ago, left the Ohio Presbyterian Home, a tract of land in Willoughby, Ohio. This 24-acre tract being in the finest section of the residential area of Willoughby, and practically adjacent to the Lake County Memorial Hospital. This property was left to Ohio Presbyterian Homes, and it is our intent to build a home for the aged. And the board finds it feasible to go ahead with this project. The property was deeded to Ohio Presbyterian Homes, subject to it being used for this exact purpose. And so that was the report back to the Synod in well before we really kind of became a part of the system. I'll back up for just a second. For the longest period of time, a lot of retirement communities around the country were owned by churches. And churches maintained, like the Synod of Ohio, maintained the Ohio Presbyterian Homes. But back in the latter 70s, there were a number of financial failures of retirement homes and problems that occurred. Many of the churches decided that they didn't really want to own those facilities. It was becoming a far more complex. There were property demands. There were all kinds of things. And much like many other organizations, the Synod told basically the founders that were working with Ohio Presbyterian Homes that they thought that they ought to start a corporation themselves. And back in about 1980, I think it was about 1982, Ohio Presbyterian Retirement Services basically came into being. A campaign was started, and the campaign was to raise monies to start our campus. And the first building that was envisioned, this is the architectural rendering. And that's the Schaefer House. It was thought that there would be just one building, and this was the architectural rendering of the building that was designed. And it was really thought that there would be an apartment building, perhaps a nursing home, and some ranches, and that would probably be the extent of the community. In 1979, this building opened up, and that was the first building on the campus. It actually expanded. It became the Schaefer-Schweitzer House. As you know, there's two buildings to it, and it was connected, and it was basically financed through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And that was because they couldn't get financing at the time other than through HUD for a building of such. Shortly after that, the Fairmount Presbyterian Church did a campaign to raise monies. They raised $1 million for the start of the Fairmount Health Center. And that building opened up in about 1980. And between 1980 and 81, there were 44 ranches that were completed. And then the Osborne Community Plaza opened about that same period of time in 1981. It was really thought that after that, the campus was about finished. It would never grow any more beyond that. If you kind of look at the stop sign right by the chapel, if you kind of go diagonally towards the child care, that was the original acreage. That's all there was. I started in August of 1987, and at that period of time, this building was just opening up. The A building opened up, and the B building was just starting to open up. And we did not own the property in between. You had to drive around Shanklin, or you had to drive around, and everyone down at Breckenridge Village North used to say, we can see the big house up on the hill, and we feel like the stepchildren down at Breckenridge Village North. And it was kind of an interesting time. Again, there was financing problems. This project was developed as a joint venture with a person by the name of Tom Snavely. and Tom did a lot of hotels and business development in and around the area. It was planned that they would develop the project, and we would have the right of refusal to buy the property 10 years later. We actually exercised that option a number of years earlier, but for a period of time we managed the building, and Tom and some of the investors owned the building and managed it. This property, and I have a picture of it, this is the Hoffman House, and it sat right about where the A building was. I never saw this house. The only thing I saw left of it, it was a farm. It was a dairy farm. And the Hoffmans owned an ice cream parlor, and they produced ice cream, and it was sold in Willoughby. So when you hear of Hoffman Ice Cream, that was the house, and the Snavely Limited Partnership bought the 9 acres to develop this property. The house was already gone. And the only thing I remember was that the farm had an oil storage tank, and we went through holy heck with the EPA as to where that oil storage tank was and what was underground. Reverend Ken Schaefer and his wife Lillian became residents here. Ken was on the board when I started, and Carl Brew was on the board when I started. They were active and involved. This is a picture of Betty Schweitzer, Art Schweitzer, who Betty and Art were active very much with the start of the organization. Art actually ran the New Horizons campaign, the campaign to start Schaefer Schweitzer House. And Art, in the middle of the campaign, I think he was 52 years old, passed away in his sleep. And Betty kind of continued the work. Susan Bookshire from our marketing department, her maiden name was Owen, and her mother, Jean Owen, was Betty's sister, and Betty's brother-in-law, Bud Owen, then took over the campaign and helped run the campaign. In the middle is Reverend Hank Anderson. He was the pastor at Fairmount Presbyterian Church, and on the far right is Carl Brew. And if you remember Acme Manufacturing in Cleveland, huge manufacturing firm, bigger than Swagelok and all of those machining companies. That was Carl's family, and he was the CFO of that company. All great people. I've often said of everyone that I ever met that worked for the development of this campus, we've heard about the hearts that aren't so kind. I knew nothing but just wonderful souls that cared about one thing, and that was to create an environment where people felt safe and secure, that it took care of individuals, and when they became residents, they felt confident in the care and the mission of the organization. And Stephen Menner was that way, Carl Brew was that way, Hank Anderson was that way, Betty Schweitzer, everyone that was really involved from the very beginning. Reverend Schaefer's wife passed away while they were residents here at Breckenridge Village North, Lillian, and a lady by the name of Mary Kennewick, who was, she and her husband were ministers, and they resided in Schaefer Schweitzer House. They were one of the first residents. They were missionaries that went around all over Africa. And Mary's requirement was that her piano went with her, and her piano traveled basically everywhere that they did missionary work. Chris Kennewick passed away, and many years later, Reverend Schaefer came to my office and he said, "David, I have a question for you, and I wondered if it would be okay." And I said, "What is it, Ken?" You know, I said, I was really kind of intrigued with this. Here I'm thinking, here's Reverend Schaefer asking me something. He says, "Mary and I are thinking about getting married. What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I have no such powers over anything such as that. I think it's absolutely a wonderful idea." And Mary married Kennewick. Her son Bill and Sylvia Kennewick lived down at Grace Woods. So that legacy kind of continues there. Reverend Schaefer passed away. I was trying to remember exactly when he passed away. I'm going to have to look at that date. But I can honestly tell you, I don't think I ever met a finer human being than Reverend Ken Schaefer. Just a marvelous individual. And if you're up in the lobby of the Schaefer House, his portrait is right before you go into the Osborne Community Plaza. And look at his eyes in that painting. That's the human being he was. He was just a remarkable, remarkable individual. And I remember leaving one of the board meetings. He was on the board when I started. And we were looking out. It was a beautiful fall evening. And I said, Ken, could you ever imagine that this campus would grow? And did you ever envision that in the very beginning? And he said, no, it's just absolutely wonderful. And that spark that has always been the spirit of Breckenridge, I think it started in 1979, and it has continued. I see it in all of you. I see it in the words and the prayers and the thoughts that come out, and all the good deeds and all of the activities that occur on this campus. We acquired the 5 acres from the school board in 1990. And we connected the 2 campuses with the 30 additional ranches, and those opened up in 90 and 91. When the new ranches opened up, Alex and Banky, that was their nickname, Nason. Does the Nason name ring a bell? Yeah. Yeah, one of the co-founders of Lubrizol Corporation. And Alex and his wife moved into one of the ranches, and we were starting to talk about doing a campaign for the creation of assisted living and a special care unit, and Mr. and Mrs. Nason did the naming gift for that building, and so it's called the Nason Center. Marjorie Lyons was a resident in the ranches, and she wanted a chapel on the campus. She said our mission is physical, mental, and spiritual, and we have exercise areas up in the plaza, and we have places for intellectual activities, but we don't have a spiritual home. We took her the design for the Nason Center, and we had a multi-purpose room that we were going to use for the chapel, and it would be used for other activities. And she said, David, I'll give money, but I won't give money to a multi-purpose room. And she said, we really need to have a chapel. And I told Marjorie, because we had tremendous financial challenges in the beginning. The first years of Breckenridge, our operating losses were about, the first year I started, I think they were $284,000. And one of the challenges was that the plaza had no revenue coming in. It was a big, beautiful building, but it didn't do a whole lot, and the board wondered how we would, create other buildings that didn't generate any revenue. And we explored the idea of setting up an endowment to help maintain the building. And Marjorie bequeathed the money for not only the building, but an endowment that has paid for the upkeep of the Lions Chapel, and it also helps with making sure that the salaries are covered for our chaplains. We wanted to start a child care, and we were the first business in Lake County to offer a child care, primarily for our employees. The first child care was only 10 children. And we opened that when we opened the Nason Center in 1994, added the Alzheimer's unit, special care, and the assisted living. The first day the child care opened up, my office, as many of you know, is up next to the chapel. My windows were open, and one of the little boys ran into a desk and wound up with about 4 stitches above his eye and blood-curdling screams, and I'm thinking, boy, was this a good idea. And it has grown to 40 children. 60% of the children in the program are our employees. Through the years, Roger and Ann Clapp, and Roger was the CEO of Lubrizol Corporation. They had helped us with many projects through the years. Ann served on our board. Ann had a passion for children, and it was one of the projects that really enlightened her. and they helped set up an endowment that has been funded with staff donations and resident donations that is now about $1.5 million and enables us to do a sliding fee scale. So a housekeeper or someone working in a position has a 60% scholarship off of the tuition for their children. And all of the educators know that everything happens in the first 2,000 days of a child's life. And we think it's a pretty good drop in the bucket. We had one of the first children become a server at Breckenridge Village North, and so it's been nice to see that there. And then Ann and Roger helped us with creating the large child care, which is located adjacent to that building, which we opened up in 1997. From there, we started to talk about other growth and expansion. We did 3 major projects in a capital campaign. It was the largest campaign in the history of Ohio Presbyterian Retirement Services at that time. And we raised $7.3 million for the expansion of Fairmount Health Center with the rehab beds, the Mahan Cultural Arts Center. Dr. and Marion Mahan were residents here. Doc Mahan was the doctor at down in Willoughby for over 45 years, never married. Marion was a home economics teacher at Willoughby Eastlake Schools, never married. And they met at Breckenridge Village North, and they were married. And so they lived here, and Doc Mahan left his estate to the organization, which enabled us to do the Mahan Cultural Arts Center. Nell Rose Reel, the Rehabilitation Center. Nell Rose Reel was a resident here at she and Cliff had passed away. Nell passed away at the Fairmount Health Center, and she said that she wanted to see more private rooms, and she was excited about the rehab facility, and she bequeathed their estate to the organization, and we did much of the expansion of the rehab center there. And then Tinkville, what a card he was. This is a picture of Mr. Veal. I think he'd be okay if I said that. He was an industrialist, started many companies. He could not enlist in World War II, and so he started some companies that supported the war effort. He ultimately created a holding company that had about 150 companies in the United States. He graduated from Case Western Reserve Engineering School, loved the engineering school, and he and his wife were involved in the original campaign. We went back many, many years after that original campaign and asked him if he'd support development of a wellness center, and he politely told me to go somewhere else. And after a number of discussions, Tink had a mild stroke, and he needed some rehab. And we had further discussions about what we envisioned for the Veal Wellness Center. And at about the 23rd hour of the campaign, he called up and he said, "What would it take to name that building?" And he helped us with the majority of a lot of the gift money for the Veal Wellness Center. During that time, we looked at the development of Grace Woods. We opened up the first brownstone, as you probably know, in 2008. We visited a sister community. Our former president of Ohio Presbyterian Retirement Services, Dave Casa, was from Minnesota, knew Minnesota Presbyterian Homes, and they were developing a program that they called a brownstone. Kind of looked like ours, but very plain, and a number of us went up to Minnesota, took a look at it. We liked the underground parking and everything on one single floor, and we built the prototype of the brownstone because we wanted to do an expansion, but we had a lot of demand for ranches, and the thought was that if we did another parcel of property, we would do ranch homes. But we opened up the brownstone, and before the foundation was complete, all 27 units were spoken for. And that kind of gave us the encouragement to start Grace Woods. Kind of interesting story with Grace Woods. When I started at the organization, I was cleaning out files. I found out two things. One, that I was the number 2 candidate for the job. The number 1 person turned it down. So you were stuck with number 2 for 30 years. So. And then the second thing was that the board had a lot of discussion with the church about doing this building down behind the church. And the church at that time said, no, we're not too interested. We've got a lot going on. And so about 18 years later, I went back to the church and asked them, is now a time when you might want to allow us to do something behind the church? And Ohio Presbyterian Retirement Services, Ken Kemper, the Chief Operating Officer, and Dave Casa, a number of folks were so supportive in helping to do the negotiations for leasing the church property. And we opened up, as you know, Grace Woods in one of the most terrifying economic times since the Great Depression. We opened it in 2010 and are so grateful that it was successful, and it has continued through the 3 phases. And the last reserve opened up in December, a year ago, this last December. So we're up to about 780 residents on both campuses, about 400 employees, and the organization and the board, we've never grown for growth's sake. It was just that there was always demand for the services and need, and continued to grow. So all told, I think Reverend Ken Schaefer and Beatrice Breckenridge had a pretty good vision for what this place should be. And so grateful for that gift and everything that has happened since that time. Pretty neat. Any questions?
You have an amazing memory.
I don't know if it's an amazing memory. I think, like all of you, there are a lot of things that you remember about mentors and folks that you worked with, and folks that really kind of had a profound difference on the organization. And very, very special people all along the way, like all of you. I think they'd be happy that you're all here. Yes?
Is there any thought floating around about additional assisted living orders?
Is there any thought about additional assisted living? And right now we have 4 openings. So if anyone is thinking about encouraging someone, we do have some openings. And it's one of the things that we've really wrestled with. Early on, I'll kind of go back to, I had one of the dates. I wanted to see if I could grab that date. But early on, we did a grant to look at Retirement Community Without Walls, which was the creation of our home health and services there. And our philosophy has been to try to figure out how to support people in their own homes for as long as possible. In the vast majority of time, we always have room available. And if not in assisted living, at the Fairmount Health Center and the higher levels of care, and we can rotate things back. We're actually pretty terrified about what's going to happen in the future with Medicare and Medicaid. Fairmount and the Nason Center in total are 150 suites total. And as many of you know, a lot of the changes in Medicaid and Medicare are not real positive or good. We do a tremendous amount of inpatient care for residents that are not residents of our campus. On any given day, there's about 30 to 40 people at Fairmount Health Center that are not residents of the campus that are there for short-term rehab. And we're not sure if Medicare is going to continue to do that. We're not sure where reimbursement is going to go. And the option that we always have is to start shifting some of the beds from Fairmount Health Center from licensed nursing to assisted living. And as you know, there has been a tremendous amount of assisted living. 2 challenges with assisted living. One, it's 100% private pay. So there's no real support if someone exhausts their resources. The second piece of it is that although they're regulated, the care delivery, if you go into an assisted living, many times you'll see it's much heavier care than what's even found in a nursing home today. And so our thought is that we can ebb and flow the number of suites available at both Fairmount and Nason, and that's what we'd like to try to explore. We're afraid that if we build more assisted living, one of the challenges is that there's not a whole lot of demand for a room that's only about 400 square foot if there's no demand or there's no services for it. And so that's kind of the thought at this point in time. We have some other options that we could explore, but right now we've been able to largely manage the population. And I will share that many times when a resident leaves us and goes somewhere else, many times it's because they're following their children, or their children want to go somewhere else, want them to come closer to them. And that, I mean, in confidentiality's sake, we can't really talk about, a lot of the discharges or why things happen. But we feel that we've got a good way to take care of the population and support the population. And all of you will tell us that if you can stay here for as long as possible, that's a wonderful thing. When I started, our average length of stay at the Fairmount Health Center was almost 5 years. Someone lived in a nursing home. Our average length of stay now at the health center is well under a year, which means that we're supporting people through home health care, other services in their apartment, and only using those higher levels of care when absolutely necessary. And I think we'll continue to strive to manage that philosophy. A very long, people always say you do way too long of answers to simple questions. I'm sorry. The simple question, or the simple answer is there's nothing immediately on looking at that. So, what other questions? Anything else? I went a couple of minutes longer, but man, we covered 38 years pretty quickly. So, it's been a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to kind of reminisce a little bit and look back. Thank you. Yes.
If I may,
Sure.
Will Bill be there when you have Gloria's memorial?
Yes, and the other thing, when we finished up this, I wanted to share with all of you that Gloria's 30th anniversary would have been June 29th, and we thought that'd be a good day to do her memorial service. And so it's going to be up at the Osborne Community Plaza, because the Nason Center probably isn't, or the Lions Chapel isn't going to be large enough. So it's going to be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I hope you all come. A lot of the staff wanted to be able to kind of remember Gloria, and Bill helped us put together a wonderful video. Thanks for helping us do that, Bill. And so we'll remember Gloria's life and have the memorial on the 29th. And thanks for helping to support her. I hope you all know how much she loved all of you, and how much she loved her work. A very special social worker. She carried that spark too. Okay, good. I think I went long enough. Thanks so much, David. Barring